Mr. Tom Berg, followed by John Bond, followed by Natalie Wassa.
Aloha, my name is Tom Berg, and as you know, I've emailed all of you numerous times, and all of you have not responded to any of them, of the emails of the inquiry. It says in the full funding grant agreement of the rules and the guidelines that if the full funding grant agreement contract is misrepresented, mischaracterized in any way, it is a breach, whether it's by the FTA or by the grantee. On November 2nd, 2011, there was a vote of 8-1 to wrongfully deny the public an ability to entertain an alternative to Governor Lingo's report, which was released on December 2nd of 2010. I was elected to office 3 weeks after that report, and the constituency that I represented wanted another vote. 3 council members, I purport, have acted in collusion and misrepresented by design to not give the voters their ability to vote on this for an alternative, on the grounds that it was stated by Councilmember Anderson on November 2nd, 2011, that there was a mandatory $200 million penalty. News flash. Hart just responded in an email to me the other day and said there's no such language. It doesn't exist. There is no penalty. It was made up. It was concocted. And I'm going to ask you again. You refused to name your source when you went to D.C. before 2011 that said we cannot change the rail technology, and you have not disclosed the source. You won't say where that information of language exists. And I've been trying for over 3 years to get the truth out of you, and we all know the truth because in closing, the report that where you just went to DC stated that we always had the right to change rail technology of its scope until you signed the contract, of which was executed on December 19, 2012. Thereby, on November 2nd, 2011, we the people, we the public, were ripped off. And you can now save the day. And Joey Monahan, council member, the Waianae Coast folks passed a resolution unanimously asking you to hold a hearing, an informational hearing, because Orlando, Florida is building maglev today, 13 miles, fully elevated, 8 stations for $400 million. Today. And you won't hold a hearing. Leningrad's building maglev. Rio Janeiro's building maglev. And not one buddy, no one in the newspaper will tell you these things because you're all in on it. Mahalo.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Members, any questions for Mr. Berg? No questions? Thank you.
I'd like to conclude with the following, that when I was a member of this council, and I was a no vote, 8-1, on a subject matter in Mililani. And the folks in Mililani were hemming and hawing, if you recall, over a 300-unit, roughly, complex, housing complex. And the folks in Mililani says, we can't handle 300 units. We're gonna do something unique. You can't own a car. You can't put your name on a title of a car. No car ownership allowed in Mililani for 300 units. You got 12,000 some units in Ho'opili, and you're telling everybody they're all gonna ride the rail, but not one is yes. You're gonna do what you did in Mililani and say, you know what? Unilateral agreement, no garages, nothing. Since y'all say you're gonna ride the rail, put your money where your mouth is, man, and none of you will do it. Shame on you. I have a lot of adjectives for you, but guess what? If I were in Councilwoman Pine's seat, you could take my pay away, remember? You passed a new rule for people like me. Thank God I'm not sitting in one of those 9 chairs so I can call y'all out.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Members, any questions for Mr. Berg? No questions? Okay, thank you. Members, we are in discussion. Any further discussion, member?
Sure.
Okay, Councilmember Berg, go ahead.
I actually in committee voted for this because it allows that due process that was lacking. By myself being removed from Oahu Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Committee, by being removed from the Transportation Committee, and being removed from the Public Works Committee, I was not afforded a public hearing. My constituents were not afforded a public hearing. The public at large was not afforded a public hearing. You have a Transportation Committee that is in its entirety pro-rail. There's no dissension. There's no democracy. There is a level of an intimidation here that when you're taking someone's pay, and the reason I voted for 12206 is because, wow, finally, heck, if this were already in effect and no one liked my behavior, I'd get a chance to say something. People could look at what made Berg snap. Why was his order and decorum unbecoming? And maybe we would then hear, and the public would know, what's confidential, what isn't confidential. Was it subject matter on the agenda? What is it not subject matter on the agenda? And I just want to allude to, members, this has been circulating, maybe you guys look at YouTube. There was a Illinois member of the state legislature who spoke standing up at the top of his lungs screaming, and took all of his 200-300 pages of a budget bill and threw them as high as he could in the air. And I may have even forwarded this email to one of you. And it was seen as, some have quoted Thomas Jefferson, dissension to a certain point isn't necessary for a healthy democracy. That when this member of the Illinois state legislature behaved in such a manner, no one called the police on him. It was extremely violent, but everyone knew that the so-called violent behavior was contained in a manner of free speech. Nobody was touched, nobody was mentioned, nobody was offended, there was no foul language. But the behavior exhibited in that example was of far greater magnitude than trying to find out if 12-0206 were to pass and I were able to have a hearing for the benefit of advising my colleagues, that the frustration of the federal government, President Obama passing a bill that says, Honolulu, cities across America can't afford rail anymore. And we're going to redefine and reclassify your fixed guideway, and we're offering you, Honolulu, that you could put under New Start's funding the bus. You could build your fixed guideway and put the bus on it, and it's a fifth of the cost. And by the way, Honolulu, we'll subsidize it at 80%. Wow. I'm in a hearing regarding condemnation, or we haven't got eminent domain yet, but we're looking at property acquisition, and I'm looking at, wow, 21 stations, of which is creating the acquisition of property, businesses, residences, warehouses, workers being displaced. And if it were the bus put on a fixed guideway, you wouldn't need 21 stations. You wouldn't be spending $222 million as it stands for property acquisition. When I was told as a council member, looking at the alternative analysis in 2006, it was $70 million for a 20-mile route, and we're now at, last year at $90 million, and all of a sudden we popped to $222 million. My blood was boiling, Chair, members. My blood was boiling. Now, I wanted to continue to ask questions and find out how much would the taxpayer save if we went with the federal government's brand new reclassification, new definition, and said, Honolulu, for a fifth of the cost, you can put buses on your fixed guideway. We'll subsidize it at 80%. Why are you going with steel wheel on steel rail? Why? That came from the Federal Transit Administration. And so I'm trying to look out on behalf of this new information that President Obama signed into law for the benefit of Honolulu. And I was at a hearing in which I no longer can participate as a voting member. So now the public and the people need to know that if 12-206 does indeed pass, the behavior of a council member that is deemed lacking of decorum, lacking in order, that I'm hoping the media and my colleagues here and the public at large say, let's not focus on anyone's behavior. Let's focus on the message. Let's focus on what brought the blood to boil. Let's focus on information being squashed, sequestered, prohibited, denied. Let's focus on that. So I just want to say, I came here today in wanting support 12-206, and the reason I can't support this is because now you're intimidating not just me, but any future council member. If you have, I don't have another income, I don't have another job, I don't do anything else for a living but 24/7 serve my district. And if I lost a month's pay because I was fighting to tell this council, did you know the federal government will let us put buses on the fixed guideway? Buses are all electric, 100% solar battery powered, make no noise. Yeah? cheaper than Ansaldo's 80 rail cars. And there's no hearing. There's no discussion. And I got to go back to my neighborhood board meetings and tell the folks there, 4 neighborhood boards, Chair, guess what? I can't get the message across. Do I need to raise my voice? Do I need to pound on the table? I'm doing what I have to do. And it's not easy being alone in this building. So 12-206, I have to vote no because of the monetary intimidation factor. I think anybody who is living paycheck to paycheck like I am, I'd be scared as heck to try to get the truth out next time. I'd be scared as heck to raise my voice because anybody could just say, guess what? I'm not only going to not just call the cops on you, I'm going to take your pay. So, this is Big Brother, Big Government coming in of this council, and I'm going to close with this, Chair. I was the only member of this council that did not vote in favor of asking the private sector of Clear Channel Hawaii that it no longer allow the broadcast of the Rush Limbaugh radio program. This council used public monies, public resources, and time and resources to say, we want you off the air, Rush Limbaugh, because we don't like the way you entertain your audience. I was really offended by that because this body is to respect free speech. If the public doesn't want to listen to Rush Limbaugh, don't buy the sponsors' products, turn the radio off, write letters, get a petition, but don't use government. This scares me. Using government to intimidate not only council members with monetary penalties, but this is now becoming a habit, not with Berg's behavior, but a habit by this council to say, look, first and foremost, we don't like a right-wing conservative on the radio. This council said, let's get him off the air. I'm alarmed. 12-206 should not be passed. But Chair, thank you so much for
Thank you, Councilmember Berg. Vice Chair Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the resolution, albeit with reservations.
I'm going to play the clip because I want you to be a little more succinct and set this statement up that we're about ready to hear. Why don't you go ahead and do that for us?
This is November 2nd, 2011. As soon as I got into office, Rick, my polls, engagement with the kids, the schools, all said we want to vote. We don't want the steel wheel. So
I'm for a new vote.
My duty to
Who else is for the new vote?
A measure.
You want to vote again?
Yes. So this was to put.
How about you, Doctor? You want a new vote? Rep Pine, want to vote again?
No.
It would have been or any full funded grant agreement was to be executed later. So the decision of we the people to say steel wheel on steel rail, not into it. I'd rather have what the rest of the world's building. Here's Councilmember Anderson saying, you know what, folks? We forfeited our right, relinquished our right. We let it lapse. We have no right to change our technology in 2011.
Chairman, I've met with the Federal Transit Administration, who is our federal overseer on Honolulu's mass transit project in Washington, D.C. a number of times. I've asked the question of the FTA that if, for some reason, this body should place on the 2012 general election ballot a question regarding Honolulu's mass transit project, and if that question should be in conflict with the 2008 ballot question regarding steel on steel that passed, could we perhaps be in jeopardy of the federal government requiring Honolulu to reimburse the upwards of $200 million that the federal government has given us thus far for our project? The answer from the FTA was yes. They would come back to Honolulu and they would require us to repay every cent that they have given us thus far for this project. Mr. Chairman, that's a grave concern for me. And that's not a hypothetical, Mr. Chairman. That's a definitive. The federal government has assured me that if, in fact, the charter amendment like this passes, they will indeed come back and require us to repay them. That's not an assumption. It's a fact. It came from the FTA themselves.
Registration, Tom Berg, followed by John Bond, followed by Natalie Wassa.
Aloha, members. Good news. I come from Eva Beach. And I came here today to let you know that this report, I've gleaned from it good news. That is, the full funding grant agreement has language in it that if the full funding grant agreement was mischaracterized or misrepresented at any point in time prior to its execution on December 19th of 2012, it gives us, the grantee, the means and the authority to get out of the full funding grant agreement. The trip that you took revealed information that we, the grantee, had the full authority and means without penalty to change to urban maglev before the final design was entered into, and again before the full funding grant agreement was signed. Because your trip revealed information that Teresa McMillan and the FTA had concurred, that we all along on November 2nd, 2011, by law and by the full funding grant agreement rules, could have amended the full funding grant agreement to allow urban maglev to be on the ballot for the people to choose its technology and save billions of dollars. Now, on November 2nd, 2011, Vice Chair Councilmember Anderson made a statement that on November 2nd, 2011 at Kapolei Hale, that we had already forfeited that right of which you just went on a trip. So back in 2011, you already had your answer, it was definitive. If you change to urban maglev in the year 2011, you will have to pay back the federal government every penny you've received of $200 million. It turns out that your trip just said that was false. It just turns out that the results of your trip says that was a lie. It just turns out that the results of that trip says someone lied. Or, I've been asking for 4 years, I want Councilmember Anderson, Chair, and you, to just name the name of the person that said in November 2nd, 2011, before that date, who said we can't amend without changing the level of scope of service. You don't change the 21 miles to anything less. You don't change the 21 stations to anything less. You change nothing. You're just putting another engine on the train. Everything I've read, and the reason I introduced the resolution, Chair, that was heard on November 2nd, is because the FTA said it was doable. Everyone said it was doable, except 8 council members on November 2nd said it was not, against the resolution. So the good news is, everyone, is that here today, from the results of that, you have November 2nd, mischaracterization on a vote that said we had no right to change the technology then, that we were to be a mandatory penalty assessed. You just read in this report that the mandatory penalty only takes place after December 19th if you make an amendment. The amendment I introduced was to take place in 2011. And if you read my testimony today, I hope the media reads it, because what you will read is that I'm going to submit a lawsuit. And until you tell me, Councilmember Anderson, who said to you that it was a mandatory $200 million payback in 2011, I won't file a lawsuit when you just disclose where it says in a document, where it says you got your information, that we would for sure, 100%, definitive was your word, return $200 million to the feds in 2011.
Berg, I'm going to have to ask you to come to a conclusion.
I'm coming to a conclusion. I'm coming here wanting to, with you, get out of this FFGA and do rail right. You now have the vehicle to do it. I've just given it to you. You have a lie, mischaracterization, versus the truth today. You always had the right to change your FFGA. So I'm calling all of you out. Do you want to go to a lawsuit? I don't. You don't. So why don't you right here now, when I stop talking, tell me who told you in 2011 we couldn't amend this contract? Don't look away. Why don't you answer? Mahalo.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Thank you. You may be seated. Members, you have any questions?